So in first chapter we are going to speak about this line. So we have Austrian variation of Queen's Gambit, and we have d takes on c5, and we have d4. So this is very good variation for black. Of course, when white takes on c5, black can easily play in the center like this. And what can we expect that white will do now? Well, the main line here is e3. But before that, let's try to see this weird move, but also not naive, b4. So what can we do now? White wants to save the pawn on c5. Some players, they just like to play like this. There are at least two good continuations now for black. You can play immediately on this pawn structure with a5. If white is trying to focus in the center, you can also focus on this b pawn, and this has to be good because this pawn structure is easily attacked like this. Typical motives here are just e5, later bishop takes on c5, knight c6. So this is completely playable, but let's also try to see this e5 move. You're directly playing in the center, so this is also fine. We have knight f3. We have again a5. If knight takes on e5, we can just take on b4. That has to be even probably a little bit better for black. So we have b5, and now what to do? Our pawn is hanging on e5. If we take on c5, he will take on e5. We have this move knight d7. So now if white pushes c6, we can take, we can give one check, and after bishop d2, we just play knight c5. If knight takes on e5, we have knight f6, and this has to be compensation for one pawn, because simply here our development is good. White needs some time to develop a little bit better, and that pawn on c6 is actually not that strong. So let's say that white doesn't want to go c6. Let's say white goes e3. Now we have a very interesting line. We can take with bishop. We can allow this trading here on d4. If white takes with his knight, he's actually losing the game. So this is very interesting line. We can just go knight e5, and what can white do now? Let's say that white wants to protect his knight with bishop. Now we have interesting move, that's bishop g4. It's a very strong move. It looks maybe like, some kind of mistake because white can block with f3, maybe with bishop e2. But actually this is now winning combination for black. What can white do? Let's say that he wants to play this f3 move. Now he's opening his diagonal on the king. We have check. And we have queen e7. So if that bishop is taken, we just have double check, and we are taking that bishop. That cannot be good for white. His king is going to be terrible. And if something happens here like bishop e2, we have just castle. And after taking now eventually on g4, we just take on d4, and we take again on d4. Simply queen cannot take because that's hanging, and that has to be winning position for black. So let's say that white doesn't want to play f3. Let's say he goes immediately here. Now we can just take, and if knight takes, this is just of course knight fork, knight d3, that is winning. And if queen takes, now we can think that this is easily won by black. It's actually not. So we can take the knight, so we look better here. F4 is not the big threat because we are going to take on b2, and then we have time to move our knight. So what about knight c3? We have to be careful after this. There is only one good move here, and that's queen h4. We are going to see very soon why this move is so strong. You're stopping some f4, and also if white goes castle here on the queen side, you have one more check. And that check is actually very important, because now when you're developing like this, knight f6, if white wants to attack you in the center directly, you have one more check. You see, queen is hanging, and everything is actually hanging in the center. Now you have queen f5, and you have bishop takes on b2, and now you have also knight takes on d5. It seems that white is building some pressure here, but actually you can save everything. f6, we have queen d4 trying to push f4. So we have g5 stopping that, we have h4, white is playing very aggressively here, but that's not going to be enough. We have excellent move, that is queen f4. If queens are traded, actually, let's see first if of course white will not take first, but if white allows queen trade like this, that has to be better position for black. Black has time now for everything. So let's go back. Let's say that white wants to decline this offer of the queen trade. Let's say queen c5. Now what can black do? It can be the question, right? Because it seems that king on e8 is not so safe. Actually, there is one fantastic move that is rook d8, and after some trades and rook d1, actually knight d7 is going to be enough to save the game. If white still wants to play tricky like this, everything hangs here and the pawns and maybe some threats on 8th rank. Actually, black can save everything with few checks. There is check, and finally, because our pawn is saved on b7, we can just move the king, and that is going to be winning position. So one more time here in this line, it's very important to know that taking on d4 is winning, but you must know some lines here with your queen. Let's go back. Someone will say, okay, what if that bishop just protects on e3? Somehow it looks, it is more logical, right, to block e-file. Actually, now you have again bishop g4. And now again, let's say f3, you go now queen e7. Of course, you're not going now queen h4 because bishop f2 would be probably good intermediate move. So after this, it is again winning here for black. Simply everything is open, everything hangs, there is no chance white will save this game. Of course, you need just some time, but you can clearly see what's the point of this variation. White is giving the pieces, but black is giving the pieces, but white is not developing, and that's the problem. You're just creating great threats. Let's say that after this move, again bishop e2, you can just take. If queen takes, we actually have same variation that we just saw. You're going to take on d4. So let's say that queen goes to d2. Now you can again go queen e7, and after eventual h3, you can go rook d8, and finally you can take. Of course, that threat knight f3 is very big, so white is actually worse here. So let's go back. So this is bad for white. So one more time, if b4 is played, you can go e5 first, and then you can play on this with knight d7, and that is going to be bad. So if white wants to play something else, as we said, that is e3 in this moment. If he doesn't want to go b4, that is e3, or let's say knight f3 with later e3. So if e3 is first played, you can just go e5. It's better to play e5 than knight c6. You actually need some pawns in the center. You're also opening your dark squared bishop. Knight f3, and we have now main line is knight c6. We're going to see that later. First, I want to show you a very interesting line, and that is actually bishop takes on c5. So this is some kind of gambit. You're leaving that pawn on e5, which is of course very dangerous line for white, and let's try to see what happens if white simply takes. Of course, if white doesn't want to take, he can just trade on d4, and then we have main line. But let's say that white takes on e5. What should black do now? You're actually developing. Knight f6, you're just increasing your chances to attack in the center, but also white king can be in danger. And now white has a choice. He can do a lot of different things. Main line is actually to go back with the knight, but let's try to see what happens. For example, if bishop goes to e2, you have this huge pressure on this diagonal. Queen b6, and if white takes, you can take. It hangs on f2 and on e5. Knight goes back, and after your development, actually that would be just unclear position, or let's say just equal. You have definitely compensation for the pawn. So let's say that white wants to go queen b3. Now you can take on e3. White doesn't have time to take on b6 because you're going to take on f2 with check, and later you will take the queen. So bishop takes, you can still take. And again, white cannot take the queen. On b6, you're going to take it with bishop. You're going to save your piece. And after a couple of trades and castle, you're pawn down, but actually you have some nice chances here for compensation. You simply have ideas which are, it's much easier to play here for black. Motives are easier to find. This is just equal position. Let's go back. So before knight goes to f3, let's say that maybe white wants to do something else. Let's say he doesn't want to take on d4. Let's say he goes back immediately with his knight. What can you do now? It seems that white will have time somehow to have everything here and to take tempo move and to be pawn up, but actually you can take on e3. You can try to create some damage. Of course, bishop is untouchable because you simply have takes on f2, and that queen hangs. White cannot actually save the queen. So after you take on e3, white can take as well. I mean, if he takes with bishop, you're just going to trade to create that bad pawn. And finally, now you can move your bishop back, and actually you have compensation. You have compensation for being pawned down. What else is possible here? Maybe white wants to go immediately here. Actually, sorry, we saw this line. Yeah, we saw all of these lines. And now, exactly, we want to see knight f3. So after knight f3, you go knight c6, you trade on d4, and now this is the point. White wants to trade everything here. White is happy if you just take now this knight. Even then you have some kind of compensation for being pawned down, but however, for Gambit players, this is excellent chance to learn something new. You can go actually bishop g4. And that's quite interesting line. So here, what you can do. What you can expect actually. First, let's try to see what if white made some bad moves. What if he goes something like knight e2? You have this motive again because queen hangs, so knight cannot really go. Or even if knight goes to f3, you can take, but unfortunately for black this is not winning position. After king e2, the best thing is just to go bishop d4, because simply white is threatening to trade the queens, and later you don't have some kind of attack. White still controls his queen, so after bishop d4 this would be some kind of repetition, so knight f3 would be equal position. And if queen gives some check, you can just go back, and queen can go back to d1 to save the knight, or if knight goes to b5, you can just go a6. So let's try to see this f3, right? We are expecting this move. After f3, black should go castle, and what can white do now? If that bishop is taken, you just have check, and after bishop e2, you take the knight with later idea knight e4. Not even to take on g4, not even to take on g4, but to go on e4. You're actually threatening everything now. You want your queen on h4, you want one of your pieces on f2, you are threatening on c3, and that knight has to be taken. And after queen d3, you can just build your pressure on e5 like this. Last chance for white would be something like bishop g5, of course. You cannot take it because your rook is hanging on e4, but you can just go queen e5, and white has a lot of weaknesses here. This is just terrible position actually for white. Let's go back. So if that bishop is taken, you're just going to take and to go knight e4. Now, what if white wants to block like this, for example? Bishop e2. You still take on d4 like this, you don't want to take with queen, of course, and after this you go immediately knight e4. You don't even have to play now rook e8. You go immediately knight e4, and one more time you have a lot of threats which white simply cannot control. This is just terrible position for white. Let's go back. Maybe knight c2, but as we know, we can always play bishop f2 in similar positions. So king has to go to e2, you have queen b6, and the best chance for white is just to trade everything like this, but actually that's not going to help. You're going to take, you're going to pin this knight, and now if queen tries something like this, you're going to be ready to give this rook, because later you have rook e8. So let's go back. That also doesn't work. So after f3, simply you go castle, and whatever white goes here, or you will take on d4, or you will go rook e8, it has to be bad. Now white can say, okay, let's go bishop e2, let's not accept this sacrifice. In this position, only now, it's better to take with the queen, because simply you're keeping your pressure now. Now pressure will be actually on f2 square. If white goes castle, you can also go castle queenside, and this is just unclear. This is just unclear. Both players are developed. Actually, black looks a little bit better with his development, but white is pawn up. And also, of course, I forgot to say that when queen takes on d4, we have to do it with queen now, because we are protecting the bishop on g4. And let's say this line, what if white simply takes, and what if white trades everything, and if he goes castle? Actually, because of your huge development, you can just go castle, and you can take actually on f2. So after all of these trades, you have this fantastic move, you're threatening rook e1, and after king f1, you can take, and finally you have this rook d1, which is of course not winning for black. This is still equal, but somehow it looks easier for black to play this. It looks easier for black to play, but this is just some kind of balance. So one more time, before we see the main line here, simply after knight f3, it's very possible to play bishop takes on c5. It's very possible to play bishop takes on c5. It's very interesting line. Now let's see the main line. The main line is actually just to go knight c6 to protect everything here in the center. And after all of these trades, we are expecting bishop d3. Let me just say that if white plays a3 in any moment, you can just stop it with a5. It's not going to change much this position. So we have bishop d3. And now, of course, we can just take that pawn on c5, but before that move, I want to speak about very interesting line, that is queen e7. So, what can we say about this move, right? Black is trying to give this check, and he's just trying to ask white, what are you going to do now? If white puts his queen on e2, you don't have to take now, of course. You can just rush a little bit with your development. Knight f6 is just going to be equal position, but also very solid for black. You're going to recapture on c5, you're developing, and everything is good. Let's just say that after queen e2, knight b4, which looks like a good move, is actually a mistake. So here, this is going to be actually winning position for white. White can go castle, and white can allow all of these trades, and even knight c2. And this looks like just losing position here for white. Actually, it's opposite. It's losing position for black. After knight a3, now you have to take, because if you take on a3 or something like that, you waste your time here with this knight. So after this, and knight b5, you have terrible position actually. What can you do? If you go something like rook b8, bishop f4 is just going to be disaster here for black. If you go king d8, then you have knight e5. And how are you going to stop this knight f7? If you go bishop e6, there is just c6 actually. And what are you going to do now? If you take, white takes on d4, and now he's threatening to take on e6. And if you finally move your king again, just bishop f3. And being rook up here is actually a terrible thing for black. That's very interesting line. So one more time. After queen e7 and queen e2, the best thing is just slowly to develop, not to go knight b4. This is a mistake. Okay, let's say that white wants to do something else. Let's say that white wants to go king f1. This is very interesting line actually. So this is position which is double-edged, completely double-edged position. We have like this. So we know in similar lines, in similar positions, that actually it is just very possible to move your king from e1 to f1 or from e8 to f8. It is very possible to move your king like this, because later you're going to prove that opponent's pieces are not on the best squares. So this is just very possible. It's not clear how to explain all of these things here, but white definitely wants to go h3 and to go king g1 and something like that. He wants to attack the center as well, knight d2 and knight d4, and this is just going to be some kind of equal position. That's very possible. And now this is the move that we are expecting, bishop e2. It's very interesting to say that queen c5 is not a good move. It looks good, you're just recapturing the pawn, you're going to develop, but actually, strategically here, white is better. White is better here because his pieces are just conquering normal squares, they're on natural squares, and white is much faster with development, so black spent a couple of moves with his queen, which simply cannot be good. Of course, it's also very hard in practice to prove that this is just losing position or something like that. Of course, it's very playable, but it should not be the best thing. So here, psychologically, I think the strongest move is just to go back with your queen. That's maybe a little bit weird, but what is the point? If white goes castle now, the point is that you moved his bishop on e2, so you're just going to continue. you're going to take on c5 and to go knight e7, but white actually had his bishop on a d3, and now he has it here on e2. So now that is just going to be some kind of tempo for you, so that's excellent thing. So after queen d8, if white wants to go bishop d3 again, now you can enter into main line with bishop takes on c5, but if you really want, you can also go queen e7. So, you know, repeating position once or two times, it's actually not a bad thing, it's actually nothing. But I think queen e7 should be psychologically the strongest move here, because again, it leaves you the choice. Later you can again do something else. You don't have really to take on c5. You can just go back if you want to d8 once and you're going to be fine. So queen e7 is definitely a very interesting line. Now let's try to see main line when we take here on c5. After bishop takes on c5, we are expecting castle, and now it should be better to go to e7. You're just blocking eventual check. If white continues rook e1, you can just go castle without any fear, everything is good. So you can also expect knight from b to d2, you can go castle, and after knight e4, of course, white is just trying to conquer the center. You have two good moves here. You can go back with your bishop. Everything is fine. If something like c5, of course, you go bishop c7. But also here, b6 is just completely normal reaction. If white takes, you're going to take. Your center will be very nice. You're just developing your bishop like this, so everything is good. So this would be the line with d takes on c5 and d4. So this is actually very playable for black. Everything is just normal. We saw some just gambit lines here, and everything is just okay here. Both sides are just grabbing here their control. They're trying to grab the center, so everything is actually perfectly fine here for black. Okay, so let's jump to chapter number 2. Let's see the games connected with this line.